Robert Harrison had always believed betrayal happened in other people's homes, not in quiet neighborhoods with trimmed hedges and backyard pools, not after 30 years of marriage, and certainly not with the people you trusted most. At 63 years old, Robert lived a simple life in a peaceful suburban town. His mornings followed the same routine every day. Oatmeal, black coffee, a short walk through the yard. After retiring from the Postal Service 2 years earlier, routine had become his comfort. His wife Margaret still worked at a local insurance office. She was 58, elegant, confident, and organized. Every morning she kissed Robert goodbye before leaving for work. Every evening they ate dinner together in front of the television like they had done for decades. Or at least that was what Robert believed. That Tuesday morning started no differently. Margaret left around 8:15 a.m., wearing a navy blue blazer and carrying her coffee tumbler. Robert spent the morning fixing a squeaky garage hinge and watering the rose bushes Margaret loved so much. By 11:30, hunger started creeping in. He remembered there was leftover meatloaf in the fridge and decided to drive home for lunch after running errands nearby. At exactly 12:15 p.m., he pulled into the driveway. The first thing he noticed was Margaret's car. That immediately felt strange. She almost never came home during lunch breaks. She constantly complained about how busy work was and how she ate sandwiches at her desk most afternoons. Robert assumed maybe she wasn't feeling well. He quietly unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house felt off. There was energy in the air. Movement. Noise. Then he heard voices coming from the backyard. He slowly walked through the kitchen toward the sliding glass doors leading to the pool. And that was the moment his entire life shattered. Margaret was in the swimming pool. But she wasn't alone. Derek Chun, his son-in-law, was with her. At first, Robert's brain refused to understand what he was seeing. Derek had been married to Robert's daughter Sarah for 8 years. He practically lived in their home during holidays and family dinners. But there was no misunderstanding possible now. Margaret's arms were around Derek's neck. His hands moved across her body with confidence and familiarity. Then they kissed. Not quickly, not accidentally, passionately, like two people who had done this many times before. Robert froze behind the kitchen curtain, gripping the counter so hard his knuckles turned white. His chest tightened painfully. His wife, his daughter's husband, together, in his backyard, in broad daylight. Every memory of the past few years suddenly began replaying differently in his head. Margaret smiling at her phone late at night. Derek volunteering to help around the house too often. Private jokes between them that Robert never understood. The signs had always been there. He just never wanted to see them. Quietly, Robert stepped away from the window. He couldn't breathe properly. Part of him wanted to run outside screaming. Part of him wanted to collapse. Instead, he walked upstairs toward his bedroom in complete silence. Everything inside the room looked normal. The neatly made bed, Margaret's jewelry box, her perfume bottle. Then his eyes landed on something sitting beside her lamp. A bottle of personal lubricant. Robert picked it up slowly. The same woman who had spent years telling him intimacy no longer mattered had clearly prepared something very different for Derek. That realization hurt even more than the affair itself. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. Carefully. Deliberately. Something cold settled inside Robert at that moment. Not panic. Not sadness. Something sharper. He walked downstairs and entered the garage workshop, where he kept tools and repair supplies. After a few moments, he found exactly what he needed. Industrial adhesive. The kind designed for permanent bonding. The warning label clearly stated, avoid skin contact. Robert stared at the bottle for several seconds. Then he walked back upstairs. Carefully, calmly, he emptied the lubricant container and replaced its contents with the adhesive. The liquid looked almost identical. Once finished, he placed the bottle exactly where he had found it. Then he locked the bedroom door from the inside and exited through the connecting bathroom into the hallway. Everything was now ready. Robert returned downstairs and sat quietly at the kitchen table. Outside, Margaret and Derek continued laughing in the pool, completely unaware. Robert made himself a meatloaf sandwich and waited. The clock slowly moved forward. 12:34 p.m. 12:46 p.m. 12:52 p.m. Then it happened. The first scream echoed from upstairs. Margaret. Loud. Panicked. A second later Derek started shouting too. Furniture scraped violently across the floor. More screaming followed. Then Margaret yelled something Robert would never forget. Call 911. Robert calmly finished the final bite of his sandwich before walking to the phone. His voice sounded perfectly concerned when the emergency operator answered. I need an ambulance at 1527 Maple Street, he said. Something's wrong upstairs. My wife is hurt. Within minutes, emergency vehicles filled the quiet neighborhood. Firefighters, police cars, an ambulance. Neighbors gathered outside, pretending not to stare. Robert stood near the front door, playing the role of the confused husband. The bedroom door is locked, he explained nervously. I just got home and heard screaming. Firefighters forced the door open. What they discovered instantly became the most talked-about story in the neighborhood. Margaret and Derek had managed to partially separate themselves, but the industrial adhesive had caused severe bonding injuries across multiple areas of skin. The humiliation on their faces was unbearable to watch. One firefighter had to turn away to hide his laughter. Paramedics worked quickly using chemical solvents to separate remaining adhesive, while Margaret cried beneath a bedsheet. Lieutenant Rodriguez from the fire department looked completely stunned. How exactly did this happen? He asked carefully. Margaret glared at Robert with pure hatred. The bottle, she whispered painfully. Someone switched the contents. Robert widened his eyes in confusion. Switched it, he asked. Why would anyone do something like that? Derek stayed silent, his face bright red from both embarrassment and pain. The paramedics exchanged uncomfortable looks. Eventually both Margaret and Derek were loaded into the ambulance for treatment. As Margaret passed Robert on the stretcher, she grabbed his arm tightly. We need to talk, she hissed quietly. Robert nodded calmly. Of course. But he never followed the ambulance. Instead, he stayed home. For the first time in hours, he sat alone in silence, thinking about everything he had lost. 30 years, gone in one afternoon. But deep down, he also knew something else. This story wasn't over yet. Not even close. About an hour later, another car pulled into the driveway. Sarah, their daughter, rushed through the front door, still wearing veterinary clinic scrubs. Dad, what happened? She demanded immediately. Derek called from the hospital, but wouldn't explain anything. Robert studied her face carefully. Sarah had always defended her mother in every disagreement. But today would be different. Your mother and Derek were injured in an accident upstairs, Robert said calmly. Sarah frowned. Why was Derek here during the day? I assumed he came to visit your mother. Sarah's expression slowly changed. That doesn't make sense, she whispered. Robert remained silent. Then Sarah asked the question he had been waiting for. Dad, what are you trying to say? Robert muted the television. The room became painfully quiet. When I came home today, he said slowly, I found your husband and your mother together in the swimming pool. Sarah's face lost all color. No, they were intimate. No, she repeated louder. I'm sorry, Sarah. She immediately shook her head. You're wrong. Mom would never do that. Derek would never. They were found in our bedroom together. Sarah stared at him in complete disbelief. Then the front door opened again. Margaret entered first, wearing hospital discharge clothes under Derek's oversized jacket. Derek followed behind her, limping badly. The silence inside the living room became unbearable. Sarah looked from one face to another, desperately searching for denial, for someone to tell her it wasn't true. But nobody spoke. Finally, Sarah looked directly at Derek. Tell me Dad is wrong. Derek couldn't meet her eyes. That silence answered everything. Sarah stepped backward, like she had been physically struck. Margaret finally spoke. Sarah, it's complicated. No, Sarah snapped. It's disgusting. Robert watched the entire scene quietly. For the first time all day, Margaret looked afraid. Not embarrassed. Afraid. Because she finally realized Robert was no longer the weak, trusting husband she had manipulated for years. But even then, Robert still didn't know the full truth. 3 days later, he discovered something even worse than the affair. Something that changed everything. That Friday afternoon, Robert was sitting in his home office sorting bills when the doorbell rang. Standing outside was a professional-looking woman, carrying a leather briefcase. "Mr. Harrison?" she asked politely. "My name is Linda Castillo from Sunrise Senior Living Solutions." Robert frowned immediately. Sunrise Senior Living was one of the most expensive assisted living facilities in the county. "I think you have the wrong address," Robert said. Linda looked confused. "Your family contacted us 2 weeks ago regarding long-term residential care." Robert felt cold all over. "My family? Yes. Your daughter Sarah expressed concerns about cognitive decline and memory problems." Robert stared at her speechless. "Memory problems?" Linda continued carefully. She explained there had been increasing confusion regarding finances and occasional aggressive behavior. Aggressive behavior, confusion, cognitive decline. They had built a story around him, a complete story, and they started building it before he ever discovered the affair. Who else was involved? Robert asked quietly. "Your wife Margaret toured our memory care unit last week." Robert felt physically sick. While pretending to love him, Margaret had been planning to remove him from his own home. Linda continued speaking, unaware of the storm exploding inside Robert's mind. "Your wife discussed transferring property ownership and liquidating certain retirement accounts to help finance long-term care." Retirement accounts. Property transfers. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was a plan. A complete plan. They wanted him declared mentally unstable, placed inside a facility, then removed from the house and finances permanently. Suddenly dozens of strange moments from the past year started making sense. Margaret insisting she handle paperwork. Sarah asking unusual questions about Robert forgetting small things. Derek offering to help with financial organization. It had all been preparation. They were quietly building a legal case against him. And if Robert had never discovered the affair, they might have succeeded. Linda finally realized something was terribly wrong. "Mr. Harrison, were you unaware of these discussions?" Robert forced a small smile. "Yes," he said softly. "Very unaware." After she left, Robert sat alone in silence for nearly an hour. The affair had hurt deeply. But this was something darker. Margaret hadn't simply betrayed him emotionally. She planned to erase him entirely. That night, Robert made several phone calls. First to his attorney, then to his bank, then to a private investigator recommended by an old friend. If Margaret wanted war, she was finally going to get one, and Robert Harrison intended to finish it. Over the next 2 weeks, hidden truths started surfacing rapidly. The private investigator uncovered hotel receipts, secret bank transfers, burner phones, and messages between Margaret and Derek stretching back almost 4 years. For years, they weren't having an affair. They had built an entire secret relationship. Meanwhile, Robert's attorney uncovered draft legal documents discussing power of attorney authority over Robert's finances. Sarah eventually returned to the house alone one evening. She looked exhausted, broken. "I didn't know," she whispered the second Robert opened the door. And for the first time since childhood, Sarah cried in her father's arms. Derek had confessed everything. The affair, the lies, the financial planning, even conversations about selling Robert's home after placing him into assisted living. Sarah filed for divorce within the month. Margaret moved into a small apartment across town after Robert formally filed his own divorce papers. But the worst humiliation came later, because word about the glue incident spread everywhere. Neighbors whispered constantly. People stared when Margaret entered stores. Derek eventually lost his management position after rumors reached his workplace. And Robert, he stayed quiet, calm, collected. Whenever people asked him what happened, he simply replied, "Some bonds were stronger than expected." Months later, Robert sat alone beside the backyard pool where his life had fallen apart. But strangely, he no longer felt broken. The betrayal nearly destroyed him, yet it also exposed the truth before it was too late. If he had come home 1 hour later that Tuesday, he might never have learned what they were planning. He might have signed documents, trusted lies, walked willingly into the trap they built for him. Instead, fate gave him one terrible afternoon, and that afternoon saved the rest of his life. Now the house was quiet again. No more lies, no more pretending, only peace. And for Robert Harrison, peace was enough.